The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rolling plains of Hutchinson, Kansas, painting the sky with streaks of orange and lavender. 17-year-old Lydia Harper walked briskly along the worn sidewalk of Main Street, a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She had been running errands for her mother, stopping briefly at the corner store to pick up bread and milk. But something in the evening air made her uneasy, a feeling she couldn't name. Shadows stretched longer than usual, and a silver SUV slowly rolled past, its engine humming softly. Lydia quickened her pace, her auburn hair catching the fading light, but she never made it home. The town awoke the next morning to the grim reality. Lydia Harper was missing. Parents whispered anxiously, children were watched closely, and the small community was suddenly gripped by fear. Hutchinson had never faced anything like this. The local police launched a full investigation, scouring fields, abandoned barns, and nearby wooded areas. Officers spoke to anyone who might have seen Lydia that evening, the store clerk, neighbors, even passing motorists. But leads were scarce, fleeting, and frustratingly inconclusive. Lydia was more than a teenager on a quiet street. She had been a bright spark in the community. At 56, with deep brown eyes and a contagious laugh, she excelled in school and had a passion for painting and creative writing. Her sketchbooks overflowed with imaginative drawings of townspeople, distant landscapes, and stories she hoped to one day publish. Friends remembered her as endlessly curious and brave, the kind of girl who would explore abandoned sheds just to sketch the peeling wallpaper or photograph the wildflowers along the riverbank. Her disappearance left a gaping hole in the lives of everyone who knew her. During the initial weeks, every inch of Hutchinson seemed combed for clues. The Reno County Sheriff's Office, joined by Kansas State Police, organized search parties, using tracking dogs and helicopters. Officers followed Lydia's faint trail near the sidewalk she had been last seen on, noting the tire marks of the silver SUV spotted earlier. Witness statements were recorded, yet inconsistencies emerged. One passerby swore they saw a man watching Lydia from across the street, while another said the SUV had already disappeared when Lydia passed. These contradictions created a web of confusion that slowed the investigation. Among the most haunting details was a small, torn notebook page found near the street where Lydia vanished. The page had sketches of the neighborhood and some hurriedly written notes in Lydia's handwriting. While seemingly innocuous, investigators preserved it as critical evidence, hoping that one day advances in forensic technology might make sense of it. Alongside it, a single glove and a half-empty water bottle were collected, carefully cataloged, and placed into storage, their significance yet unrealized. Lydia's family, her mother Corinne and father James Harper, lived in suspended anxiety. Each day brought the hope of a miracle and the fear of what they did not know. Corinne refused to clear out Lydia's bedroom, keeping every notebook, every brush, and every article of clothing untouched. James spent long nights driving the same streets Lydia had walked, holding on to the possibility that someone somewhere had seen her and might come forward. The community rallied around them, organizing vigils, prayer circles, and fundraisers to keep the search alive. For years, the case went cold. Investigators followed every lead but found no definitive answers. They interviewed dozens of potential suspects, none of whom could be tied to Lydia's disappearance through evidence available at the time. As technology in the early 2000s had its limits, forensic testing on the glove, notebook page, and water bottle failed to produce usable DNA. Witness memories faded, and townspeople moved on cautiously, though the memory of Lydia Harper lingered like a quiet ache in Hutchinson. By 2017, the landscape of forensic science had changed dramatically. Advances in DNA testing and the emergence of forensic genetic genealogy offered new hope. Detective Miranda Ellis, newly assigned to the Reno County Cold Case Unit, pored over Lydia's evidence with renewed determination. She focused on the glove and the notebook page, hoping that modern techniques could finally shed light on 2 decades of silence. Months of painstaking laboratory work led to a breakthrough. Tiny skin cells on the glove produced a partial DNA profile. Cross-referencing this profile with national databases yielded no immediate matches. Yet, using forensic genetic genealogy, the team traced familial links, constructing a complex family tree pointing to an unexpected individual, Martin Keegan, a local contractor who had lived near Lydia's neighborhood in 2001. Keegan's life had appeared unremarkable. Neighbors remembered him as quiet, dependable, even helpful, volunteering at local events and occasionally assisting the Harper family during community gatherings. No one could imagine that he was connected to Lydia's disappearance. Detectives proceeded cautiously. They collected discarded items and gathered additional DNA samples, following every lead without alerting Keegan. The evidence grew steadily stronger. The DNA from a cigarette but Keegan had carelessly discarded matched the profile from the glove. It was the break that the Harper family had waited for over 15 years. When law enforcement finally confronted Martin Keegan in 2018, his reaction was unnervingly calm. At first, he denied any involvement, but the weight of genetic evidence, witness inconsistencies, and his own movements at the time proved overwhelming. After hours of questioning, he confessed. Lydia Harper's final moments, long shrouded in mystery, were recounted in chilling detail. According to him, he had abducted her impulsively as she walked home from the store, and in a moment of panic, her life ended. He had hidden her body in a remote wooded area just outside Hutchinson, a location investigators had overlooked in the original search. The town reeled from the revelation. People who had once trusted Keegan as a neighbor and volunteer were left questioning everything they knew. The Harper family felt a complex mix of relief and sorrow, finally having answers but confronting a truth far more devastating than imagined. Search teams returned to the secluded woods, discovering remains that matched Lydia's description. DNA testing confirmed her identity, closing a chapter that had haunted Hutchinson for nearly 2 decades. The trial that followed was exhaustive. Prosecutors presented the DNA evidence, the confession, and detailed investigative records, showing how meticulous police work had finally brought justice. Defense attempts to question the validity of genetic genealogy were swiftly dismissed by expert testimony. For Karen and James Harper, hearing the sequence of events in court was both unbearable and necessary, a final reckoning with the grief that had defined their lives since 2001. Martin Keegan received a life sentence without parole. The Harper family, while devastated, finally experienced a form of closure. Community members held memorials and initiatives were launched in Lydia's name, art scholarships, youth programs, and advocacy for missing children. Hutchinson, a town that had lived under a shadow of fear and uncertainty, began the slow process of healing. Detective Ellis reflected on the case as a testament to perseverance. Lydia Harper's story, while tragic, became an emblem of hope for families with missing loved ones. The combination of human determination, scientific innovation, and unwavering community support proved that even the coldest cases could eventually be solved. And though the pain of her loss remained, the resolution allowed the people of Hutchinson to finally remember Lydia not as a missing girl, but as the bright, talented, and beloved young woman she had been. The months following Martin Keegan's arrest were tense in Hutchinson. The small town, once confident in its sense of safety, now wrestled with disbelief. How could someone so ordinary, someone who mowed lawns for neighbors, helped at the church, and attended local fundraisers, be capable of such darkness? People replayed past encounters in their minds. The waves at the grocery store, the casual chats at town hall meetings, the small favors that seemed so innocent. Every act of kindness now carried the shadow of suspicion. For the Harper family, the emotional roller coaster continued. Karen Harper spent mornings wandering through Lydia's old bedroom, touching the sketches and journals that remained untouched since her daughter's disappearance. Each page brought a painful reminder of what had been stolen, the laughter, the dreams, the future Lydia had envisioned. She loved colors, Karen whispered to her husband one day, tracing the lines of a sunset Lydia had painted at 14. She painted a world brighter than any of ours. James Harper, too, wrestled with the guilt and helplessness of those years. For 17 years he had driven the same streets, watched the same sidewalks, hoping that a clue would appear. Now, with the case cracked, he felt relief mingled with the bitterness of time lost, years spent in limbo, each one heavier than the last. The investigation revealed more disturbing details. Martin Keegan had not acted entirely alone in the web of deception he had spun. Old neighbors recalled seeing him dispose of items at odd hours, and some claimed to have glimpsed him near woods where he later admitted to hiding Lydia's body. Every confession, every detail, painted a clearer picture of the meticulous care with which he had tried to erase all traces of his crime. Yet even in his careful planning, he had left tiny, almost imperceptible threads. The cigarette butt, the DNA on the glove, that decades later would unravel everything. Detective Miranda Ellis described the scene in court. "We often assume that time erases evidence. In reality, time preserves it if it is carefully collected and stored. That cigarette butt, the glove, the notebook page, they were silent witnesses for nearly 2 decades. The use of forensic genetic genealogy had revolutionized the case. By identifying distant relatives of the perpetrator, law enforcement had been able to piece together a complex family tree that led straight to Keegan, a man who had been hiding in plain sight. The courtroom murmured when investigators detailed how the genetic connections had been traced, each step painstaking and precise. The Harper family attended every hearing, watching the man who had taken their daughter stand quietly, unflinching. Martin Keegan offered little in terms of apology, his demeanor cold and calculated. Yet, during cross-examination, the full extent of his manipulation came to light. Court records detailed how he had befriended the family over the years, attending community events where Lydia's absence was felt most keenly, positioning himself as a comforting presence while simultaneously guarding the secret of his crime. He became part of their grief, prosecutor Rachel Delaney argued, her voice shaking with conviction. Every comforting word, every volunteer effort was a mask for his true self. As the trial progressed, shocking revelations emerged from Keegan's past. Neighbors, once confident in his innocence, recounted incidents of troubling behavior dating back to the late 1990s. A teenage girl who had worked on his lawn described inappropriate comments and attempts to isolate her. Another neighbor mentioned unexplained trips Keegan had taken with no clear purpose. These testimonies, though decades old, illustrated a pattern of predatory behavior that law enforcement had previously been unaware of. Outside the courthouse, the community wrestled with its own emotions. Vigils and memorials were held not just for Lydia, but for the innocence the town had lost. Flowers and candles adorned the sidewalks, and residents shared memories of Lydia's smile, her laughter, and her creativity. It became clear that the healing process was not just for the Harper family, but for Hutchinson itself. The town had been forced to confront the unsettling truth that evil could exist behind the most ordinary of faces, that trust could be misplaced, and that vigilance was sometimes the only safeguard. Meanwhile, forensic teams revisited old evidence with renewed determination. Soil samples, fibers, and photographs were re-examined using modern technology, confirming the connections between Lydia's disappearance and Keegan. Every piece of evidence validated the painstaking work of detectives who had refused to let the case fade into obscurity. Forensics, long thought of as static, had evolved into a dynamic tool capable of bridging decades of silence. The Harper family, though relieved that justice was being served, faced the ongoing challenge of living with the trauma. Karen Harper began speaking publicly about her experience, advocating for families of missing children, emphasizing the importance of hope and persistence. James Harper started a scholarship in Lydia's name, providing funds for young artists in Hutchinson, ensuring that Lydia's creative spirit would continue to inspire even in her absence. Twists in the case did not stop with Keegan's arrest. Investigators discovered that he had hidden additional belongings of Lydia's in a storage shed near his home. Among the items were sketches, a paintbrush set, and a journal that had not been seen since her disappearance. These artifacts offered glimpses into Lydia's inner world, her dreams, and her perspective on life. Forensic anthropologists and psychologists examined these items, revealing Lydia's resilience, imagination, and deep love for her community, painting a portrait of the young woman whose life had been stolen far too soon. The emotional impact of the case rippled beyond Hutchinson. News outlets covered the breakthrough extensively, emphasizing the role of forensic genetic genealogy in solving cold cases. Families across the country took note, sharing their own stories of missing loved ones and finding renewed hope. Lydia Harper became more than a tragic figure. She became a symbol of perseverance, illustrating that no matter how much time passes, justice can be achieved. Detective Ellis, reflecting on the investigation, noted, "This case reminds us that every small action, every piece of evidence can ultimately matter. The cigarette butt, the glove, the notebook, they waited for someone to listen. And we did." Her statement resonated with law enforcement officers nationwide, reinforcing the idea that dedication and patience can bridge even the longest gaps in time. For Hutchinson, the final resolution was bittersweet. Martin Keegan received a life sentence without parole, ensuring he would never harm another family. Yet the community had been irrevocably changed. People looked differently at neighbors, at casual acts of kindness, and at the fragile trust that binds small towns together. Schools implemented new programs teaching children about personal safety, awareness, and community vigilance. Parents became more proactive, ensuring that children were never left alone in situations that could place them at risk. Through all of this, Lydia Harper's memory remained vibrant. Her artwork was displayed in a local gallery, celebrating her talent and imagination. Annual scholarships encouraged young artists to pursue their passions, turning tragedy into inspiration. Families affected by missing children found guidance and solace in Hutchinson's story, understanding that science, determination, and community could converge to restore a sense of justice even after years of darkness. As the sun set over the Kansas plains, the town stood quietly, remembering the girl who had vanished but never been forgotten. Lydia's legacy, her art, her courage, her unwavering presence in the hearts of her family, continued to illuminate Hutchinson. The case, while closed, became a living lesson in resilience, a testament to the power of persistence, and a stark reminder that even the most hidden truths will eventually surface. The morning of the trial dawned clear, with a pale Kansas sun illuminating Hutchinson in a way that seemed almost ironic. For 17 years, the town had been shrouded in questions, whispers, and fear. Now, the courthouse steps were crowded with people who had followed Lydia Harper's story through the decades: neighbors, teachers, friends, journalists, and families of other missing children. The air vibrated with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Martin Keegan sat silently, his expression unreadable. Outside, supporters of the Harper family held signs that simply read, "Justice for Lydia and truth cannot hide forever." Corinne and James Harper had spent the early morning hours together in quiet reflection, holding hands, drawing strength from one another. "It's not just about her," Corinne whispered to James. "It's about every child who never got a voice. Today, we speak for them too." The prosecution opened with a powerful statement that reverberated throughout the courtroom. For 17 years, Lydia Harper's disappearance haunted this town. For 17 years, a family lived in uncertainty, wondering if their daughter would ever return. Today, thanks to the tireless work of investigators, the meticulous preservation of evidence, and the revolution of forensic science, we can finally answer that question. Justice will be served. Gasps and nods filled the room, the weight of those words pressing on everyone present. Evidence was presented in meticulous detail. Investigators recounted the critical discovery: a cigarette butt, discarded nearly 2 decades prior, whose DNA would ultimately link Keegan to Lydia's abduction and murder. Photographs were displayed, faded images of Lydia's school events, her art projects, and family portraits that now felt both haunting and tender. Forensic analysts walked the jury through how modern DNA analysis, combined with genetic genealogy, had uncovered distant relatives of Keegan and pieced together the puzzle that had remained unsolved for so long. The court heard about the emotional manipulation Keegan had used to maintain his cover. Witnesses testified about his public displays of kindness, how he had ingratiated himself with the Harper family, attended vigils, and even volunteered for community events commemorating Lydia's life. He inserted himself into their mourning, prosecutor Rachel Delaney said, her voice rising with righteous anger. Every comforting gesture, every smile, every act of support was part of a facade designed to conceal his crime. Testimony from surviving neighbors revealed disturbing patterns. One recalled seeing Keegan carrying items from the woods near his property late at night. Another remembered conversations that hinted at unusual obsessions and behaviors. Each revelation compounded the community's horror. The predator had been among them, invisible not because he was cautious, but because he had mastered the art of appearing ordinary. Outside, the town struggled with its own reckoning. Conversations among neighbors turned to whispered recollections of small interactions with Keegan that now seemed sinister in retrospect. The trust that once defined Hutchinson had been shaken. People wondered if they had ignored subtle signs, if the smiles they shared had concealed something monstrous. At the same time, a sense of unity began to emerge. Collective grief transformed into shared determination to protect the children of the community. Inside the courtroom, the Harper family listened as forensic evidence was presented connecting Keegan to Lydia's remains, which had been hidden on his property for nearly 17 years. Soil samples, fibers, and personal items were meticulously matched to evidence collected at the time of her disappearance. Testimony from forensic anthropologists confirmed that Lydia had resisted, that she had fought valiantly against her attacker, and that her courage endured even in her final moments. Each detail was painful, yet it brought clarity, a closure that had been denied for too long. The emotional peak came when the final witness, Detective Miranda Ellis, recounted the breakthrough moment of the case. The cigarette butt didn't just provide DNA, she explained, her voice trembling slightly. It provided hope. It reminded us that even after decades, evidence can tell a story. It can speak for victims who no longer can. Lydia Harper, seated in the front row, wiped tears from her cheeks, feeling the weight of that hope resonate through her entire being. When Keegan was called to testify, he remained stoic. Yet, under cross-examination, cracks in his composure began to show. His attempts to justify or minimize his actions failed against the tide of evidence. Every lie, every misdirection from the past was laid bare. Witnesses recounted his involvement in the community, the comfort he had offered while secretly hiding his crime, and the chilling obsession he maintained over Lydia's life and memory. The courtroom was silent, absorbing the gravity of these revelations. After days of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. Hutchinson seemed to hold its breath. For 17 years, the town had waited for answers. Now they would finally come. Hours later, the verdict was announced, guilty on all counts. The reaction was immediate and intense. Tears flowed freely, and a mixture of relief, sorrow, and vindication swept through the courtroom. Lydia Harper fell into her husband's arms, the weight of years of uncertainty finally lifting, even if it could never erase the pain of loss. The sentencing was equally poignant. Judge Eleanor Briggs addressed Keegan with measured yet firm words. For 17 years, you hid behind the faces of those who trusted you. You manipulated, deceived, and betrayed. Today, the court ensures that your actions will have consequences, and that justice, though delayed, is delivered. Keegan was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never harm another child. For Hutchinson, the aftermath of the trial became a journey of collective healing. Community programs were established to educate families on safety, to provide support for victims of crime, and to foster resilience among children. Memorials for Lydia Harper were created, celebrating her creativity, her courage, and the life she had been denied. Her artwork was displayed in local galleries, scholarships were established in her name, and her story became a touchstone for discussions on justice, perseverance, and the power of science. Karen and James Harper, though forever marked by grief, found solace in the knowledge that Lydia's legacy would endure. They continued to speak publicly, sharing their experience and advocating for families still searching for answers. Their message was simple: never give up hope, preserve every piece of evidence, and trust that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how much time passes. Detective Ellis reflected on the case in interviews after the trial. This investigation shows that patience, dedication, and modern forensic science can overcome even the longest periods of silence. Evidence waits. DNA doesn't forget. Victims deserve answers, no matter how many years it takes to deliver them. By the 20th anniversary of Lydia Harper's disappearance, Hutchinson had transformed its grief into action. Annual art exhibitions showcased the talents of young artists in her honor. The Harper family continued their advocacy, attending conferences, speaking to lawmakers, and providing guidance to law enforcement agencies seeking to adopt similar investigative methods. Lydia's name had become synonymous with hope, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. Even as the town slowly moved forward, the story of Lydia Harper served as a lasting reminder. Evil may hide behind ordinary faces, but persistence, science, and community vigilance can expose it. Trust may be tested, innocence may be stolen, and grief may endure for years. But truth, when sought with determination, ultimately prevails. For families of missing children everywhere, Lydia's case offered a profound lesson. Do not surrender to despair. Keep searching, keep remembering, and trust that even after decades, the threads of truth can be woven together to reveal justice. The sun set over Hutchinson, casting long shadows across the streets where Lydia once played, laughed, and dreamed. Her memory illuminated the town in ways no darkness could extinguish. Though she would never return, her story, her courage, her creativity, and her indomitable spirit would live on, inspiring hope for generations to come. For anyone still seeking answers, the message is clear. Time cannot erase the truth. Science, determination, and love can bridge even the longest of gaps, ensuring that victims like Lydia Harper are never forgotten, and that justice, though delayed, is never denied.